let's discuss gender-based violence, another case in South Africa. A 30-year-old Pamela Malila is fearing for her and her daughter's life and is currently in hiding. Now, the teacher was brutally attacked with a panga by a former romantic partner in May. He was released on bail and has subsequently gone on the run. But now he threatens Malila, sending her messages that he will kill her and her family. Her ordeal is one of thousands that South African women go through at the hands of their partners. On this now, we're joined via Teams by Dr. Lesley Ann Foster, the Executive Director of Masimanyane Women's Support Center. Thank you so much, Dr. Foster, for your time this afternoon. Now, we've heard so many of these cases. We understand, of course, in South Africa that, women who are killed by an inmate partner is 5 times higher in South Africa than global average. What will it take, for this country to start addressing injustices against GBV victims?
I think we've begun, addressing the scourge that we have in our society, but it's a slow process because the inequality that women face runs very deep and very wide. And so we have to do a lot of work at several levels to be able to turn the tide on gender-based violence. What bothers us as an organization, Masimanyane Women's Rights International, is that it seems that in the month of August, there is a particularly intensified backlash against women. We've heard about 2 women being killed in Gqeberha. 2 women were shot in their stationary car in Willowvale yesterday. We had a 14-year-old raped and murdered in one of the communities there in East London. So what we're seeing is that there is a surge in femicide and rape during the month of August. And, we're quite frustrated, exasperated by this because of the work that we do to bring awareness to communities. But I think the big challenge is with the state. We have to make a very big shift around what has become unhealthy masculinities. And that is steeped in patriarchal principles and values, which have a historical bent to them. And we haven't really examined that deeply enough. We haven't examined what the colonization of the country has done and what kind of brutal masculinity it made the norm. That was inherited through the apartheid system, and the protests against both colonialism and the protests against apartheid were very hyper toxic masculinity, I would say. And then we have militarization in the country, and militarization also gives birth to a particular kind of masculinities, all of which come together, they collide together in a very unhealthy way that is causing the violence that women face within society, because all of that violence becomes a site is within the family and the home where this violence plays out, if it's not played out in the public sphere. So we have to understand that, and I think our analysis has been growing, but hasn't reached the depth that it has now, where we better understand that our prevention programs have to move beyond marches, beyond candlelight ceremonies, beyond wearing orange or black or purple to end violence, because none of that really has an impact on changing the tide on violence against women. So the work that needs to be done is very, very deep. And the only source of hope I can say at this moment is that we have, for the first time, a national strategic plan on gender-based violence, which was the first instrument or the first mechanism that takes a whole of society approach, that looks at a multi-sectoral strategy to end violence. It looks at leadership, it looks at prevention, it includes access to justice, it includes economic empowerment and research. Never had that before. We've worked in isolated ways.
Dr. Foster, just on that, the National Strategic Plan, when you look at this particular case of a woman who's fearing for her life, who has been severely abused, she was hacked. We have pictures as the SABC of just how abused she has been by this perpetrator who's now on the run. From from a practicality perspective, the National Strategic Plan, how far does it go in protecting of the victims? I mean, this is somebody who has a restraining order against this person. So the role of law enforcement authorities seems to be very slow at this point in time.
Oh, I agree with you. We have a lack of due diligence when coming to examine cases of violence against women, and there are structural impediments to why that happens. The main being that the police we actually look at when cases go to them, they are very reluctant to take on those cases because they are measured on the principle of crime reduction. Now, if they need to show that they've reduced crimes and a woman comes and presents herself as a victim of violence, they will find ways, and they often do, we know this in the country, to not take on that case, to not investigate it, to not follow through with it. And there are a lot of those kinds of impediments to access to justice that have to be ironed out. And it's not a simple issue. It's not easy to do that because you talk about institutions that are massive, that have their DNA, stamped so deeply that to tell them and to show them why it's important to make that shift takes a whole lot of work. The state has a very, very big responsibility in addressing violence against women. Civil society has a responsibility as well, but it's not as important as the states because the states is enshrined within the Constitution, the equality principle within that, and then the protection and the safety of all citizens is actually enshrined within the Constitution. So it makes it a state obligation to ensure that there's no discrimination, no oppression, and no violence against all of its citizens. And this is, the state at the moment has got the National Strategic Plan. They're busy working through that plan to understand how to respond to these cases. But as we sit here now, women and girl children are being failed by all of us in society because we all have a responsibility and we all need to do something to change this trajectory of violence against women in our country.